Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host, Matt Addison, and Tom Beattie is back with me again. Before we dive into the podcast, to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, you can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on their 2-year plan, and of course, there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link, as ever, is in the podcast episode description box below for that. But for the podcast today, we're going to have a little bit of a look ahead to what comes next for Liverpool. We've obviously reached another milestone in yet another international break. It feels very strange to be in a third one of those already this season, but we are going to look a little bit beyond that. We're going to look a little bit back as well at what Liverpool have done. But I suppose that's probably the place it makes sense to start on. It was another statement win, I think, for Liverpool against Aston Villa last weekend, and everything seems to be going well for the Reds at the moment. Their rivals have dropped points, they keep winning. There's not really too much more to say beyond that, is there?
Yeah, I think it couldn't have really gone better. I think, obviously, the start of the season, I think we were all kind of waiting to see how it was going to develop under Arne Slot, and obviously after 15 wins and being top of the Premier League and the Champions League table as well, it just looks really promising going into this third international break. And I guess it's a time for us to reflect a little bit, obviously, on the start that we've had this season as well. And, you know, when you look at sort of defensive record and sort of how he's got kind of the attack gelling, the midfield, and obviously dealing with the goalkeeping situation with injuries as well, I think when you actually look back over sort of them first few months of the season, I think you can kind of say he hasn't really put a foot wrong as the manager so far. And I think, you know, that's really promising, sort of moving into this next phase of the season where we know the games are going to come thick and fast. And there's them extra kind of European games, obviously with the new format in the Champions League as well. So there's obviously a lot kind of moving forward to look towards for Liverpool. But I think the start of the season's been really promising.
It's been said quite a lot of times that Liverpool maybe haven't played anybody yet, or they've not, a big enough sample size because they're not too far into the season. But I think, at this point in the season, you can't really make either of those arguments. I think to have played, I think it's 11 Premier League games so far, isn't it? I think in the league so far for everyone. So when you're that far in, there's not 10 or 11 bad teams in the Premier League. It can't be an easy match every single week. They've gone to Arsenal, they've played Aston Villa. There's been, the defeat to Nottingham Forest, which I think in the context of how good the Forest have been so far this season, maybe looks a little bit different as well. But it feels like there's maybe not, a huge sample size to say, this is the new Liverpool and, this is all going to be fantastic. But it's probably large enough now to say that, A, the transition has been smooth and has been good, and B, Liverpool, this is the level that they're at now. They are a level above Aston Villa. They've beaten Chelsea. They're, at least as good as Arsenal and Manchester City. Would that be a fair assessment, do you think, B, at this point in the season?
Yeah, I mean, like you said before, it was such a statement when I thought at the weekend with Villa, and it kind of showed where the two teams are at a little bit, I thought. And obviously they've gone a little bit on a rough run of form of late. I know they lost in Europe coming into the game, but, it was still a really tough kind of obstacle, I think, for Liverpool to overcome. And yeah, again, it's just really promising, I think, sort of, the challenges that this team's been able to overcome. And like you say, there has been that kind of cliche this season that Liverpool haven't had to play sort of one of the big boys kind of thing. But I think when you go through the record, beating United away from home, the Chelsea game, I thought was a really it was a big win for Arne Slot, I felt, because they were in really good form as well. And, even going away in the Champions League as well, kind of back to back with big Premier League games. So, the Milan game, for example, going San Siro and all that comes with that and kind of navigating that tie, I thought was a difficult game. And it just looks really promising at the moment. And I think being able to juggle the amount of games that we've been able to, and obviously we've had that bit of luck with injuries, I'd say, that, when you look around the league and at our kind of title rivals, Man City and Arsenal, maybe they've not had that bit of luck in terms of injuries. But I think, you could flip it the other way and say that, we lost maybe the best goalkeeper in the world, for example, and, we've had to kind of navigate that challenge. So, yeah, I think that, it's really promising in terms of the teams that we've been able to beat so far this season. There's been a lot of big tests in there, I'd say, and even going away to Palace, for example, and responding after the Forest game with a win and things like that. It shows that I think there's a bit of kind of steeliness to this team that we know was there, obviously under Jurgen Klopp. They were able to dig deep. But yeah, it's great to see under a new manager that he's able to kind of generate that spirit within the squad as well. So yeah, there's been no drop off in that regard. And yeah, I think looking forward now, obviously all eyes are on obviously the City game and the Real Madrid game at the end of the month. So they will be massive tests. But I think in terms of the games that Liverpool have played so far, it's kind of been faultless, really, other than the Forest game. So, yeah, big tests to come, but I think they've kind of sailed through by this kind of third international break.
Yeah, and I think they've got a kind of solid platform to build on as well. It's not, it's not unrealistic to say that they deserve the number of points that they've got. They maybe, on another day against Forest could have got a draw in that quite easily. It was, a very good goal that Forest scored, and another day could have easily been 0-0, or even Liverpool could have nicked one. So even when they've dropped points, it doesn't feel like that. It's been a poor day, yes, but still a day when Liverpool could have picked up points. I think that's usually a sign of a team that can go quite far. And as you say, there's bigger games to come, which we'll come to, but let's not disregard the matches that they've played up to this point as well. So I think we'll have a little bit of a look at City and Arsenal, because I think the position that Liverpool find themselves in relative to those two teams, obviously Liverpool maybe have overachieved to a certain extent, certainly overachieved compared to a lot of maybe fans of other teams might have liked or might have hoped. Manchester City and Arsenal maybe have done a little bit worse than what a lot of people thought as well. So let's start with Manchester City. Obviously, 5 points behind Liverpool now after they lost to Brighton and then Liverpool won. The two teams will meet in a couple of games' time. It's been a tricky run for them. I think that the first time ever that Pep Guardiola's lost 4 games in a row. It's very much not the case that they're out of the race, though, is it? There's definitely a way back of, from what we've seen of Manchester City in previous seasons. I don't think anybody in the world has written them off by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, we know, obviously, they're a team that's capable of going on kind of 20-game winning runs and long unbeaten streaks. So I think even Arsenal over the past couple of seasons have been able to put them kind of runs together as well. So I think Liverpool and Liverpool fans are kind of looking over the shoulder a little bit at the moment. Obviously, it's been a great, promising start for Liverpool, but, equally we know what them two teams are capable of. And I think we've seen in previous campaigns a little bit that, City have started quite slow in certain seasons where they've kind of grown into the season, particularly after Christmas. So we know there's a big chunk of games coming for all teams, but I think that, in the back of my mind, certainly I'm kind of expecting City in a way, just as a kind of law of averages, or in terms of the probability of it. Looking at the previous kind of 7-8 seasons under Pep Guardiola, I'm kind of expecting that there is going to be that sort of run after a certain point in the season. But I guess for Liverpool, it's maybe a case of trying to get as many points on the board as we can now, and sort of landing that bit of a blow if we can, in terms of when we actually play them. I think that's maybe been a problem in previous seasons. I think, the season where Liverpool went on to win it, they were able to land that kind of killer blow at Anfield when City had gone on a bit of a barren run in the early months of the season. So there's kind of parallels there. I think maybe Liverpool will be kind of sensing that window of opportunity a little bit to put down a bit of a marker at the end of the month. But yeah, like you say, looking at them two teams, we know what they're capable of, and I wouldn't be that surprised, to be honest, if they were to kind of get their act together and go on a massive kind of winning streak after a certain point in the season. So I think we'll have to see how they kind of respond to this kind of run they've been on of late.
How much of it do you think is about Rodri? I think that's the obvious sort of thing if you were looking for a reason that Manchester City have maybe struggled a little bit. I don't know whether it can be just that. I know they've had other injuries as well, but I'm less sort of sympathetic towards that, given that they've spent a lot of money on the players that they do have. It's a deliberate choice from Pep Guardiola that he doesn't want to have a huge squad. He's decided that he doesn't want many players, so therefore if you get a few injuries, I think you've kind of just got to deal with that and accept that was a risk that you took. It's a risk that Liverpool have taken in the past, and sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. How much of it is down to Rodri, and what are the other factors that you can see so far with Manchester City this season?
I think Rodri, to be fair, I think he certainly in previous seasons he was such a match winner for Man City, and he was kind of a one of a kind sort of player in that respect, from a defensive midfield point of view. But again, like you touch upon there, I think there should be enough quality and strength in numbers as well for City. I know against Brighton they had Kovacic kind of in that number 6 role. You kind of expect with his quality that there wouldn't be a massive drop off in terms of kind of performance level. So yeah, it's been a little bit confusing in that respect. Obviously, they have had that massive blow of losing him. We know how good he is, but equally, you would expect a team and a manager of that caliber to be able to respond quite well to it. So I've been a little bit surprised in that respect of how kind of the form has dropped off. I do actually think that they might be able to sort of rouse themselves at some point in the season and kind of find solutions in that position. I think they're on a really rough run at the moment, and maybe they kind of need a game against the likes of Liverpool to kind of kickstart their season in a sense. But yeah, it's been a little bit sort of confusing in some respects to kind of see the drop off that they've had. I think you mentioned there that it's the worst run that Pep's had as a manager. So that kind of shows, how much it's kind of troubling them at the moment. So yeah, it's kind of caught me off guard a little bit, and I do actually think they'll respond at some point in the season, but I think from their point of view, they'll be hoping that they don't leave it too late and they end up further behind Liverpool as it stands. So, yeah, again, it's one of them. Again, all eyes are kind of on the Liverpool game a little bit, but they need to kind of get themselves out of this rut as well. And I think at the moment, they don't seem to be able to kind of find the solutions in that position.
Yeah, I mean, the one time Liverpool did beat Manchester City to the title, it wasn't when the two teams were close. It was when Liverpool got that huge lead and then were able to kind of get over the line from that point. So, look, I'm not going to say that they're going to be that many points clear again, because I think that's probably unlikely, but it does sometimes take that little bit of a buffer, because we know that City can come on. They might buy a replacement for Rodri in January. They might get one or two players in and suddenly win 17 games in a row. But as long as Liverpool keep up doing their side of things before that point, then obviously, they've got that little bit of a buffer. And I think it's really interesting what Manchester City's next 5 games are as well. We'll go through Arsenal in just a second, but for City, after the international break, is Tottenham, a team that's already beaten them in this 4-game run of defeats. Then they've got Liverpool, of course, which is obviously not going to be an easy game, and one that probably, even if they've beaten Spurs and Liverpool have beaten Southampton, there's probably a little bit of pressure on City to at least get a draw in that game, probably even to go to Anfield and win, which is not something that they've done particularly often, particularly with fans in the ground. And after that, Nottingham Forest will be a tricky game for them, Crystal Palace, and then Manchester United, which at the moment, Ruben Amorim just come in. We have no idea what that might look like. It could be, a tricky game. But again, a manager who in this 4-game spell has already shown that he can beat them. He's not obviously going to have Victor Gyökeres to be able to score a hat-trick again against Manchester United in that game. But, there is, a potential maybe for a bit of an uplift for them. So, I mean, in that run, it's not unrealistic to think that City might drop a few more points as well. Now, we don't want to look too far ahead, and Liverpool have got to do their own job as well. But if you're Pep Guardiola and you're looking to get out of a 4-game losing streak, Spurs, Liverpool, Forest, Crystal Palace and Manchester United, it's not the nicest run, that, is it?
No, certainly not. And even beyond Liverpool, so the Forest game, we know they're kind of riding high at the moment in the table. I think they're third in the table at the moment, and they made such a good start to the season. Obviously, they beat Liverpool at Anfield as well. The Palace game, we know they've had problems against Palace in the past. Even Liverpool we have in previous seasons. So we know they're a tough team to come up against. And, it's always a challenge, I think, going to Selhurst Park with the atmosphere and that sort of thing. And particularly if they may have dropped points against either Liverpool or Forest, it might be one of them kind of games where they're looking at that and seeing it as a bit of a challenge then. And like you say about the Manchester derby as well, whatever kind of form United are in, obviously they have got quality, and I do expect once the new manager is kind of, in the hot seat, I do imagine that the form might improve as well. So I think by that point in the season, you might be looking at that and thinking, that's a bit of a difficult clash as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a rough run of fixtures, to be honest. And, particularly coming after a 4-game run where, they've obviously lost 4 times on the spin. If that was Liverpool, I'd be looking at that run of games and with a bit of trepidation. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see again how they kind of respond to the run they've been on. I think a lot pivots on that Liverpool game. If they are able to get a result at Anfield, you'd then expect maybe the City of old to kind of come back into play a little bit, and maybe they can go on one of them runs that we know they're capable of. But yeah, at the moment, it just seems like kind of everything's stacking up against them a little bit.
Let's move on to Arsenal as well. Obviously, another team that is far from written off at this point. 9 points behind Liverpool. I think 4 points behind Manchester City. For them, it's not been an easy period as well. They've obviously had plenty of discussion. Mikel Arteta has not been reluctant to point to injuries as a reason for that. I think maybe that's been slightly exaggerated, not least because for the last couple of seasons, they've hardly had any injuries to deal with. They've got far fewer injuries than what Liverpool and even Manchester City at the moment have had to deal with. But are you surprised at all with the way that Arsenal have started this season and sort of the struggles that they've had at certain times? Because we know how consistent they've been. They've sort of been in that Liverpool position really of just about falling short when they've come up against Manchester City. I think a lot of people thought that this was the season where they might take that next step and jump up to the next level, but it's not quite happened for them yet. Are you surprised at all by that?
I actually am. I mean, even sort of a month into the season, they were getting results. And I remember the Tottenham game, that felt like a massive marker for them in the season. And I remember after that, they went away to City, didn't they? And, they were probably unlucky not to come away with the victory in that game. Obviously, that was 2-2. I think they had a sending off as well, and they were having to kind of defend for their lives a little bit in that game. And I felt, again, there was maybe that bit of steeliness to Arsenal, and maybe that was a bit of an indicator that they were going to go on and really challenge for the title this season. I still think that they're very much in the running, and I know that they kind of fell behind us in the table. So I think they're about 9 points off Liverpool at the moment. But obviously it is a long campaign, and, we're only 11 games in. But yeah, I have been a little bit surprised, I think, at the kind of the run of form they've been on of late. I think after the Bournemouth game, I think maybe there's been a bit of a lack of confidence maybe in the team, or, it's hard to kind of pinpoint anything particularly. I know they lost against Newcastle as well. And I think even the Chelsea game, they didn't really look like winning that game for me. They kind of, it was very kind of evenly matched, and you'd sort of expect Chelsea more so to be in the hunt for the top 4. Obviously, Liverpool came up against Chelsea a few weeks ago, and that was a very tough game for Liverpool. So we know they're a good side, but I think, to be challenging for a title, you need to kind of go away to the likes of Stamford Bridge and get a result. And yeah, I just think it's been a bit of a torrid run for Arsenal in that respect. And it just feels a little bit, again, like things are kind of stacking up against them. And yeah, I think maybe the international break's come at a good time for them, possibly, and it offers them a little bit of a reset.
Yeah, they have had a tricky run of fixtures. They've obviously had matches against Liverpool, Bournemouth that you mentioned is a tricky one as well. But I think for me, the only reason I'm surprised that they're 9 points off Liverpool, but I think that's partially to do with how good Liverpool have been, as much as Arsenal have dropped off a little bit as well. But I think for me, the question really has always been about goal scoring. I think if you compare Liverpool's attack to theirs, it doesn't really feel like there's ever a comparison to be made. Obviously, Bukayo Saka is an excellent player, but he's never going to get you the numbers that Mohamed Salah has put up. The rest of the attack as well, Liverpool have got 6 senior options when they're all fit. Obviously, I know that's not the case at this particular moment in time, but probably Diogo Jota will be back, a couple of weeks after the international break has finished. I think whenever you look at a team that is going to go and win the league, they've probably got to be the top scorers, and I don't ever really think that it was realistic for Arsenal to do that. They've obviously been unlucky. They've had Odegaard injured, and that's a big loss for them. But you look at say, Martinelli and compare him to how Luis Diaz has been playing, or you'd look at Kai Havertz, is he ever going to put up the numbers that Diogo Jota does? Or the direct comparison, I think, for me is just in the two attacks, the two goal scoring areas. I know Arsenal obviously have put up enough goals in the last couple of seasons to compete and get really, really good points totals by the end of those seasons, but it's not quite been enough. I just wonder if they maybe will look back at the summer and wonder if they'd have just got in an extra attacking option that possibly might have made a bit more of a difference. They went and signed Calafiori, who I think is a good player. They've got Mikel Merino, but I wonder, possibly maybe just one more attacking player might have been a better option for them.
Yeah, I mean, that looked like the kind of glaring sort of final piece in the jigsaw for Arsenal, didn't it? And they have struggled at points for goals. Obviously, Gabriel Jesus, I think, coming off the bench at times, he can be a threat just because of his pace and sort of an eye for goal. But I think as a start and centre-forward, maybe he's not of the level of kind of the teams around him, kind of challenging for the title. And yeah, I think it's a good kind of point of comparison in terms of sort of the numbers that them attacking players are putting up. You'd expect maybe Saka to get into the kind of 15-20 goal mark, but Martinelli, it's a bit of a lottery. I think he was able to do it one season, wasn't he, where he kind of got into double figures, but there's maybe a question mark over whether he's able to do that again this season. And yeah, I think Kai Havertz as well, when you sort of look at our kind of centre-forward options, he's not kind of hitting them sort of numbers that you'd be expecting from Diogo Jota or even Darwin Núñez you'd expect this season. So, yeah, I think as a direct point of comparison, they may be a little bit lacking in that respect. And, the kind of the big plus point for them, obviously, has always been the back four in that defence. And obviously, they missed Saliba for a number of games, sort of over this stretch of fixtures, including the Liverpool game. So I think that's been a big loss. And obviously, Odegaard being injured as well is probably, being a factor in that drop-off in form a little bit. But yeah, like you say, I think that might be a bit of a glaring sort of mistake for them in the season, that they, the likes of Ivan Toney, for example, he was on the market. Obviously, he did well for England in the Euros, and they might kind of look at him as someone who was able to kind of post consistent numbers in the Premier League over a number of years, and they might kind of rue that, I think, at the end of the season, that they didn't go and get a proven goal scorer. So, yeah, I think you're right, to be honest, that might be the difference between the two teams at the moment.
Yeah, it's always been Leandro Trossard was, popping up with late goals and things like that, but he doesn't seem to have maybe hit the same levels so far this season. So I just wonder if possibly a little bit of a refresh in there would have done them a bit of good. But I suppose we'll never know. Just quickly, the next five for Arsenal: Nottingham Forest when they come back from the November international break, then West Ham, Manchester United, Fulham, and Everton. Slightly easier run, I think, than Manchester City's. You'd expect Arsenal to put together, a decent run of results in there. But Forest and United and even Fulham and Everton can be tricky at times. I think probably West Ham is the one that you'd look at and think they should be able to breeze past at the moment. But who knows whether they'll still have the same manager at that point. There's all sorts of things that could go on in that kind of run. But I think it's fair to say Arsenal should probably start to pick up a few points. And then, of course, it's up to Liverpool to try and match that. So Liverpool's next five, Southampton, of course, afterwards, Manchester City, then Newcastle, Everton and Fulham. So an interesting run of games for Liverpool as well. The City one, I think, will take care of itself in terms of talking about that. But Southampton away, you'd expect Liverpool to be able to go there and win. Newcastle, Everton and Fulham, a bit of a mix of games really for Liverpool in that run. But are you expecting, near perfection as it has been up to this point in the season during that run?
I actually think it's a tricky set of fixtures, that. I think that Newcastle away, we obviously know that that's always a tough game with the atmosphere up at St James's Park. And I think last season it was an interesting game, wasn't it? Obviously, Darwin Núñez came off the bench and was able to get the winner in the end. But yeah, it's always a tough game up there, I think, and that'll be a tough test again. And then we know Everton, obviously, it'll be the final game at Goodison Park in terms of a Merseyside derby. So, yeah, I think their fans will be up for that. And yeah, it's always a kind of a bear pit atmosphere there as well. So, I I guess in the Premier League, you're always going to get them sort of fixtures back to back where there's a tough kind of test every week. And you'd expect kind of on paper, I think, for Liverpool to be able to navigate them. But yeah, obviously we know with Everton, even under Jurgen Klopp, Liverpool's record wasn't the best, particularly away from home. So I do think that'll be a bit of a staying test for Liverpool. But yeah, kind of on the balance of things, in terms of the record that Arne Slot's been able to post so far in his Liverpool reign, you'd probably be looking at them games and thinking, Liverpool are certainly the favourites, I think. So yeah, it's kind of a difficult one to assess in that regard, and you'd expect with the Fulham game at home that Liverpool again would be favourites there. But yeah, they've had a decent start to the season as well. So I think that the games are coming thick and fast. It's always tough, and even as you touched upon before, looking at Arsenal's fixtures, they've got Forest coming up who've been very good, and obviously Man United as well, where they've got the new manager coming in. So there's always kind of them side narratives, I think, in the league, and it'll kind of be interesting, I think, to see how the season really develops. I think after the City game, particularly for Liverpool, and maybe that pressure will be on Arsenal then to kind of come up with a response, maybe, if they do fall kind of further behind, or whether that gap does close if Liverpool are to lose that game. So I think there's a lot kind of riding on the City game, obviously, but, looking beyond that, there are kind of tough games on the horizon for Liverpool as well. So yeah, I think we're coming into a bit of a telltale point in the season now, and we'll kind of see how it develops from there.
Yeah, it's a couple of big weeks coming up, isn't it? Obviously, these games, the next 5 that I've read out, are Premier League only. Obviously, a few days before Liverpool play Manchester City, they've also got Real Madrid. But that Newcastle and Everton, Newcastle away on a Wednesday night, and then obviously the Everton game is lunchtime on Saturday. So it's that real short turnaround, 2 away games, 2 tricky games as well, back-to-back, away from home. I'm sure, as I say, that the focus will be on the week before with the glamour ties, but the Newcastle and the Everton game, I think, are going to be just as important the following week, or arguably even more important, to be honest, with the position that Liverpool are in the Champions League. They don't necessarily need to beat Real Madrid, but if they could beat Manchester City, Newcastle and Everton in the space of, what would it be, 8 or 9 days, I think that would be a huge statement. But I'm sure we will talk plenty about all of those games on the Liverpool.com podcast. I think that will just about do us for this week, though. Thank you very much to Tom, as ever, for joining me, and for you at home as well for watching and listening. We'll be back next week with the next Liverpool.com podcast.